The overhead light hummed to life, casting a stark, circular spotlight that effectively isolated us from the rest of the darkened clinic. It should have felt clinical. It should have felt routine. But the air between us was vibrating with a frequency that had nothing to do with the equipment. Emily's gloved fingers hovered near my mouth, professional and precise. Yet the way her eyes locked onto mine over the rim of her mask suggested she was searching for something far deeper than a hairline fracture. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry, realizing too late that the sterile barrier of the doctor-patient relationship had already dissolved. I wasn't her patient, and we both knew it. I was just the only thing in the room she wanted to focus on. That tension didn't manifest out of thin air in the chair. It had been accumulating, heavy and silent, from the moment I walked through the front door 40 minutes earlier. There is a specific, heavy atmosphere to a medical space after the patients have gone. When I keyed in, the automatic lock buzzing loud in the empty street, the door swung open into a wall of cool, conditioned air. It smelled faintly of eugenol, that sharp, spicy clove scent of temporary fillings, and the underlying crisp note of high-grade disinfectant. It wasn't unpleasant. It was the scent of control. I let the heavy glass door click shut behind me, severing the connection to the chaotic city noise outside. The silence that followed was absolute, amplified by the low, rhythmic thrum of the HVAC system pushing filtered air through the vents. The waiting room, usually a holding pen for nervous energy and outdated magazines, felt like a sanctuary in the dim security lighting. The chairs were empty, casting long, geometric shadows across the carpet. I moved through the space quietly, the paper takeout bag in my hand crinkling softly, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. I was here to deliver dinner, a simple act of service for a friend buried under administrative backlog. But the environment turned the gesture into something conspiratorial. I bypassed the front desk, moving down the long hallway toward the clinical bay. The operatory rooms were dark, the dental chairs silhouetted like dormant machinery waiting for power. But at the end of the hall, a spill of bright white light cut across the floorboards from the sterilization center. It was the heart of the practice, the place where everything was stripped clean and reset. I stopped in the doorframe, watching her before she knew I was there. Emily stood with her back to me, framed by the stainless steel counters and the blue glow of the autoclave. She was still in her scrubs, a dark navy set that fit her better than the boxy hospital standard. She was leaning forward slightly, her forearms resting on the counter, as she studied a set of digital radiographs on the wall-mounted monitor. The posture was one of intense, singular focus. I watched the way her shoulders rose and fell with a slow, measured breath, the tension of her day visible in the line of her neck. We had been friends for 6 years. We had navigated bad breakups, career pivots, and the general debris of life in the city with a comfortable, easy camaraderie. I knew her coffee order. She knew my password. But standing there in the quiet hallway, watching the clinical precision with which she swiped through the x-rays, I felt the familiar, dangerous tug of something else. It was an admiration that bordered on hunger, a desire to be the subject of that intense, unwavering attention. The friendship was the safe container we lived in. But lately, the walls of that container felt thin. Every time her hand lingered on my arm a second too long at brunch, or her gaze dropped to my mouth when I was talking, the structural integrity of just friends took a hit. I gripped the takeout bag tighter, the heat of the food radiating against my palm, grounding me. I wasn't here to complicate her life. I was here to feed her. But as the autoclave hissed, a sharp release of steam that broke the silence, she turned. Her eyes found mine instantly, wide and unmasked in the harsh lab light, and for a split second, she didn't look like a dentist surprised by a visitor. She looked like a woman who had been waiting to be found. "You're lurking," she said, her voice dropping into the quiet space like a stone in water. It wasn't an accusation. It was a welcome. "I'm observing," I corrected, stepping into the light. "There's a difference. And I come bearing pad thai, which I know is the only reason you let me have the door code." She smiled then, but it was a tired, soft thing that didn't quite reach the professional guard in her eyes. The air between us shifted, thickening with the unspoken weight of the empty clinic, the solitude, and the sudden, sharp reality that we were alone, in a place designed for intimacy, however clinical it was supposed to be. I set the paper bag on the stainless steel counter, the crinkle of the packaging loud in the quiet room. "I got extra peanut sauce," I said, trying to bridge the gap, trying to pull us back to the safe, neutral ground of takeout and gossip. "And I assumed you haven't hydrated since noon, so there's a sparkling water in there too." Emily didn't look at the bag. She didn't even look at the water. She was leaning back against the counter, her arms crossed over the dark blue scrub top, her head tilted slightly to the side. The fatigue I had seen a moment ago seemed to evaporate, replaced by a sharpening of her attention that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a look I had seen her give to complex cases, a mix of curiosity and calculation. "You're doing it again," she said softly. I paused, my hand halfway to the chopsticks. "Doing what? Being a delight? Bringing you sustenance?" "Rubbing your temple," she observed, nodding toward my left hand, which had, without my conscious permission, drifted up to massage the side of my head. "And your masseter muscle is jumping. I can see it flexing from here." I dropped my hand instantly, feeling like a child caught chewing their nails. "It's been a long week. The deadline for the architectural review is Monday. I'm just tired." "It's not just tired. It's torque." She uncrossed her arms and took a step toward me. The movement was fluid, stripped of hesitation. In the clinic, she moved differently than she did in the rest of the world. Out there, she could be indecisive about which movie to see or which route to take. In here, she was governed by protocols and anatomy. There was no wasted motion. She stopped just inside my personal space, close enough that I could smell the clean, minty scent of the mouthwash she probably used between every patient, layered over the warmer, more personal scent of her skin. "Turn your head," she instructed. "Emily, the food is getting cold. Turn." I turned. I exposed the side of my neck to her, a gesture of submission that felt instinctive. She reached out, her fingers cool and dry. She didn't caress, she palpated. Her thumb found the hinge of my jaw, pressing into the joint with a firmness that made me gasp, a sharp spike of pleasure pain radiating behind my ear. "Open!" she commanded. I parted my lips slightly. "Wider." I opened until the joint clicked, a small, audible pop in the silence of the sterilization room. "There," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its friendly lilt and gaining the weight of a diagnosis. "Crepitus. And the muscle belly is rock hard. You're not just stressed, you're grinding your teeth into dust. How long has the headache been there? 3 days? 4? I looked back at her, trying to find my friend and the doctor standing in front of me. "Since Tuesday," I admitted, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "You're going to crack a molar if you keep this up," she said, her thumb making small, circular motions against the knot of muscle at the corner of my jaw. It was maddening. It was a clinical examination, purely diagnostic, yet the sensation of her hand on my face was electric. It grounded me and unraveled me at the same time. I wanted to pull away to preserve my dignity, and I wanted to lean into her hand like a cat seeking heat. "I'm fine," I lied, the words vibrating against her fingers. "I just need to eat and sleep." "You need a night guard, but first, you need an evaluation," she countered, finally dropping her hand. The absence of her touch left a cold spot on my skin. I want to take a look. Just a quick check to see if you've done any damage to the cusps. Now? I looked at the dark hallway leading to the operatories. I'm not a patient, Em. I'm the delivery service. You're in my clinic and you're displaying pathology, she said, a small, challenging smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. It was the first crack in the professional mask, a glimpse of the playful dynamic we usually shared. But it was weaponized now. She knew I had a hard time saying no to her when she was right. 5 minutes, then we eat. Unless you're afraid. I'm not afraid of a dentist, I scoffed, though my heart rate suggested otherwise. Good. She turned on her heel, assuming compliance, and walked out of the bright sterilization room into the shadows of the hallway. Chair 3. It has the best view. I watched her walk away, the confident cadence of her steps echoing on the laminate floor. I could have stayed. I could have insisted we eat in the break room like normal people. But the pull was undeniable. It wasn't just about the jaw pain or the friendship. It was the chance to surrender control, to let someone else, to let her take the weight for a few minutes. I left the food on the counter and followed her into the dark. Chair 3 did, in fact, have the best view. The floor-to-ceiling window framed the city skyline, a glittering grid of amber and steel against the black sky. From this height, the traffic was just a silent river of light, disconnected and distant. But I couldn't focus on the architecture of the city. I was too hyper-aware of the architecture of the room I had just walked into. The dental chair sat in the center of the space like a throne, or perhaps an altar. It was upholstered in a sleek dove-gray leather that looked almost blue in the ambient light from the window. The equipment arm hovered above it, a skeletal limb of folded metal and dormant hoses. I hesitated for a fraction of a second at the toe of the chair. It was a strange threshold to cross. In our daily lives, I was the one who drove the car. I was the one who picked the restaurant. I was the one who navigated the logistics. I was used to being the pilot. But to sit in that chair was to abdicate all responsibility. It was a voluntary surrender of agency, a contract signed with the body. Sit, Emily said. She didn't look up from the bracket table where she was arranging a fresh tray cover. Her voice was calm, distracted, stripped of the social cadence we used over wine. This was her domain. The tone wasn't bossy. It was simply the voice of someone who knew exactly how bodies should be arranged in space for optimal access. I sat. The leather was cool against the back of my thighs, the material firm and unyielding. I settled into the seat, feeling the contours that were designed to hold a human form in suspended animation. Scoot back, she instructed, walking over to the side of the chair. All the way. Your head needs to be in the cradle. I shifted my hips back, sliding until my spine aligned with the chair's curve. Emily reached behind me, her hands adjusting the articulating headrest. I felt the mechanism click and lock, the pads pressing firmly against the base of my skull. It was a stabilizing grip, one that effectively limited my ability to turn away. I was locked in. Going back, she warned. She didn't wait for my confirmation. She tapped the foot pedal, and the hydraulic motor hummed to life beneath me. The sound was low and steady, a vibration that traveled up through the frame of the chair and into my bones. The backrest began to descend. My center of gravity shifted, the world tilting on its axis. My feet rose as my head dropped, the blood rushing quietly to my ears. There is a profound, primal vulnerability in the act of reclining in a medical chair. You are exposing the softest parts of yourself, the throat, the jugular, the face, to someone standing above you. It goes against every survival instinct that demands you stay upright and guarded. As the ceiling tiles came into focus, replacing the view of the city, I felt my pulse jump in my neck. I was horizontal now, effectively pinned by gravity and the design of the equipment. Emily moved out of my peripheral vision, walking to the sink behind the chair. I couldn't see her, which made the sounds of her preparation amplify in the quiet room. The rush of water from the automatic faucet was sudden and loud. I heard the distinct, rhythmic sound of her scrubbing, skin against skin, soap lathering, the friction of cleanliness. It was a ritual of purification that separated the woman I knew from the clinician who was about to work on me. I lay there, staring at the articulated arm of the overhead light, listening to her dry her hands, the rustle of paper towels, the metallic clink of a waste bin opening and closing. Then, the distinct, sharp snap of latex gloves being pulled taut over wrists. That sound, the snapping of the elastic, triggered a Pavlovian response. My breath hitched. It was the sound of a barrier going up, a layer of synthetic skin that signaled the end of casual contact and the beginning of a procedure. "Open your eyes," she said. I hadn't realized I'd closed them. I opened them to find her standing directly over me. She had donned a mask, a pale blue shield that hid her mouth and nose, leaving only her eyes visible. Without the context of her smile or the set of her jaw, her eyes were intense, magnified by her focus. She reached up and grabbed the handle of the overhead light. With a fluid, practiced motion, she pulled it down and angled it toward my face. Click. The beam blinded me for a second, a harsh, circular sun that bleached out the rest of the room. I blinked, tears of reflex springing to the corners of my eyes. When my vision adjusted, the world had narrowed down to just this: the halo of the light and Emily's face hovering within it. The rest of the clinic, the city, the darkness, the friendship, had ceased to exist. We were isolated in the spotlight. She sat on her stool, rolling it forward with a soft whir of wheels on laminate. She moved into the space between my knees and the headrest, closing the distance until she was right there, her gloved hands raised, hovering just above my chest. The power dynamic was absolute. I was looking up, supine and exposed. She was looking down, masked and capable. And for the first time all night, I stopped trying to analyze the tension and just let the gravity of it pin me to the chair. Emily didn't just enter my personal space, she colonized it. She leaned forward, her stool rolling those final few inches until her knees brushed the side of the chair, effectively boxing me in. The shift was absolute, collapsing the distance between observation and intimacy in a single motion. She was so close that the ambient temperature around me seemed to shift. I could feel the radiant heat of her body through the thin fabric of her navy scrubs, a warm, living presence hovering just above my chest. The air between us was shared now, a recycled loop of breath. I inhaled, and the scent was overwhelming. Not just the clinical top notes of antiseptic and latex, but the base notes of her. The subtle, woodsy fragrance of the cedar shampoo she used, the faint, comforting scent of coffee from hours ago, and the clean, distinct smell of her skin. It was intoxicating in its specificity, a sensory overload that made the empty clinic fade into the background. "Chin up," she murmured. It wasn't a request. It was an alignment. I tilted my head back, exposing the vulnerable line of my throat. She reached out, and the first point of contact was the back of her left hand brushing against my cheek as she positioned herself. The latex was smooth, synthetic, and cool, a stark contrast to the flush of heat rising in my face. Then, she established her fulcrum. That's what they call it, the anchor point. She rested her ring finger and pinky firmly against the point of my chin to steady her hand. It was a professional technique, a way to ensure precision and safety, but to me, it felt like she was claiming ownership of my jaw. Her grip was firm, unshakable. She held me there, steadying my trembling with her own absolute stillness. With her right hand, she brought the dental mirror into view. The light caught the round glass, flashing a quick, dizzying reflection of my own parted lips before she slipped it inside. The metal rim was cold against the sensitive mucosa of my inner cheek. It was a shock, that sudden intrusion of hard steel into soft tissue. She used the mirror to retract my cheek, pulling the flesh aside to reveal the molars hidden in the back. There is something profoundly submissive about allowing another person inside your body, even in this clinical capacity. The mouth is a primal space. It's how we feed, how we speak, how we breathe. To surrender it to someone else is to render yourself mute and defenseless. I couldn't talk. I couldn't object. I could only lie there, my tongue retreating instinctively to the floor of my mouth, while she explored the internal geography of my stress. "Open," she whispered, her voice sounding loud in the small, pressurized space between our faces. I complied, stretching the tight, aching muscles of my jaw wider. I pushed past the point of comfort, the joint protesting with a dull, heavy ache. Good. She leaned in closer, her head tilting to align her line of sight with the beam of the light. The blue mask was inches from my nose. I stared up at her eyes, watching the pupils dilate as she focused. I could see the fine lines of concentration fanning out from the corners. I could see the individual lashes. I was looking at her with a resolution that usually only lovers get to see, a proximity that blurred the edges of her face into a landscape of skin and intent. She moved the mirror, the metal clicking softly against a tooth. Click, click. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, a metronome counting down the seconds of my resolve. With every touch, every shift of the instrument, she was mapping the damage I had done to myself, tracing the wear patterns on my enamel. But it felt like she was reading a diary I hadn't meant to show her. She was seeing the evidence of my anxiety, the physical toll of the things I didn't say. Her other hand, the one not holding the mirror, moved. Her gloved fingers slipped inside my mouth, palpating the muscles of the cheek from the inside, while her thumb pressed against the outside. She was pinching the muscle, feeling the density of the tension. The sensation was overwhelming, her fingers inside me, manipulating the flesh, testing the resistance. It was clinical, yes. It was a standard examination for bruxism. But it was also the most intimate thing that had ever happened between us. My breath hitched, a jagged sound that I couldn't hide. She paused. Her fingers went still inside my mouth. She didn't pull away, she didn't apologize, she just held that contact, her hand deep inside my personal space, her body heat radiating over me, acknowledging the sudden spike in my heart rate without saying a word. The silence stretched, heavy and thick. I was laid bare, open and vulnerable, and she was the one holding the light. From this angle, Emily was a looming presence, a landscape of blue scrubs and focused intensity. The surgical mask stripped away the social armor we both usually wore, leaving only her eyes visible. And her eyes were terrifying. Without the softening context of her features, her gaze was distilled down to pure, unadulterated focus. She wasn't looking at me, not in the way a friend looks at a friend across a dinner table. She was looking into me, studying the anatomy of my stress, reading the history of my anxiety written in the wear facets of my molars. It felt less like a medical exam and more like an excavation. I tried to look at the ceiling tiles to find some neutral pattern to anchor my mind, but my eyes refused to obey. They were drawn back, magnetic and traitorous, fixated on the bridge of her nose and the way her lashes cast tiny, sharp shadows on her cheekbones under the harsh exam light. Then, My gaze dropped to her hands. There is a specific kind of arrogance in the hands of a surgeon, a confidence that borders on the divine. They were instruments of absolute precision. The way she manipulated the mirror was a masterclass in economy of motion. She didn't just hold it, she wielded it. Her movements were microscopic but deliberate, a silent language of competence that I found overwhelmingly attractive. It was a dangerous realization to have while your mouth was propped open by those very hands, knowing exactly how much force was required to extract a root, and exactly how much gentleness was needed to soothe a nerve. The duality of it, the potential for pain and the capacity for care, was dizzying. A dark, intrusive thought bloomed in the back of my mind, unbidden and sharp. I wondered what would happen if I closed my mouth. Not to hurt her, but to trap her, to bring my teeth down slowly until they met the resistance of her fingers, to taste the latex and the skin beneath it. It was a primal urge, a desire to interrupt her clinical detachment with something messy and real. I wanted to bite down just hard enough to make her stop looking at my teeth and start looking at me. The silence in the room deepened, becoming a physical weight. The only sounds were the wet, slick noise of the mirror moving against my cheek and the rhythmic, steady intake of her breath. In, out. It synced with mine, a forced intimacy that made my chest ache. Every time she exhaled, I felt the ghost of her breath wash over my face, warm and minty, filtering through the mask. She shifted slightly, leaning in closer. Her focus was absolute. But lying there, exposed under the harsh light, I felt like she was finding cracks in something else entirely. She was peering into the fissures of our friendship, seeing the stress fractures in the platonic barriers I had spent years maintaining. I felt transparent. I felt like the light was shining right through my skin, illuminating the raw, pounding want that was circulating through my veins. Surely she could see it. Surely she could feel the heat radiating off my face, the way my tongue wanted to chase her fingers, the way my pulse was hammering a frantic, telling rhythm against the very artery she was using as a rest for her hand. She was looking for pathology, but I was terrified she was about to diagnose my desire. The clinical detachment I had been clinging to began to disintegrate, dissolving like sugar in hot water. I couldn't stop watching her. It wasn't a conscious decision anymore. It was a physiological imperative. Every time her thumb brushed against the sensitive skin of my lower lip, a jolt of electricity arced down my spine, grounding itself deep in my stomach. The heat in the room seemed to rise, creating a pressurized atmosphere that felt less like a medical bay and more like the inside of a diving bell. I wasn't thinking about enamel anymore. I was wondering what those fingers would feel like if they weren't searching for pathology, but for pleasure. My gaze must have been heavy. It must have had a physical weight to it, a tactile pressure that she could feel through the layers of her focus. Because the rhythm changed. The steady, hypnotic click, scrape, click of the explorer against my teeth faltered. The metronome stopped. Emily didn't pull away immediately. She froze. Her hand went perfectly still, the mirror held suspended inside my cheek, the metal cooling against the mucosa. The silence that rushed into the room was deafening, filling the space where the sound of her work had been. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the empty clinic anymore. It was a charged, static-filled silence, the kind that precedes a lightning strike. She took a breath. I saw her chest rise and fall beneath the navy scrubs, a sharp, shallow intake of air that betrayed her composure. Slowly, deliberately, she withdrew the mirror. She didn't put it down on the tray. She just pulled it back a few inches, creating a tiny buffer of space. But she didn't let go of me. Her left hand, the one anchoring my jaw, stayed exactly where it was. Her fingers were still curled under my chin, her thumb still pressing into the muscle, holding my face in place. She looked down. For the first time since the exam started, she broke her clinical focus on my mouth and met my eyes. The connection was visceral, a physical impact that knocked the wind out of me. Her pupils were blown wide, dark pools that swallowed the reflection of the exam light. There was no professional distance left in that gaze. There was only heat and a sudden, terrifying awareness. "Stop looking at my hands like that," she said. Her voice was low, a rough whisper that scraped against the silence. "You're not my patient." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. It was the tidal moment, the point of no return. She hadn't said, "Stop looking at me." She had been specific. She had called out the exact nature of my fixation, the tactile obsession I had been trying to hide. The flush hit me instantly. I felt the heat rush up my neck, burning across my cheeks, a crimson flag of guilt and arousal unfurling under the harsh white light. I was caught. I was the friend who had crossed the line, the patient who had made it weird. By all rights, I should have looked away. I should have apologized, laughed it off, made a joke about the painkillers or the fatigue. I should have retreated into the safety of our platonic history, but I didn't. Instead of looking away, I held her gaze. I let the flush burn. I let her feel the heat radiating off my skin against her gloves. It was a silent challenge, a refusal to back down. "I know I'm not your patient," my eyes said. "So what am I?" The air between us crackled. The challenge landed. I saw the shift happen in real time. The professional mask she wore, the one made of protocols and distance, slipped. It didn't fall off. It dissolved. The tension in her shoulders changed, shifting from the rigid posture of a clinician to the coiled readiness of a woman who realizes she is being hunted and who might just want to be caught. Her thumb, still resting on my jaw, twitched, a tiny, involuntary spasm of muscle against bone. She wasn't pulling away. She was leaning in. The sound of the dental mirror hitting the stainless steel tray was shocking in its finality. It wasn't a gentle placement. It was a drop. A sharp metallic clatter that echoed off the sterile walls and signaled the abrupt end of the procedure. The noise severed the clinical timeline we had been operating on. The exam was over. The diagnosis had been abandoned, or perhaps it had simply changed into something that couldn't be charted on a medical form. Emily didn't step back. She didn't roll her stool away to create the polite distance that usually follows an intrusion into personal space. Instead, she stayed right there, locked in the intimate zone, her knees still brushing the edge of the chair, her breath still mixing with mine. But her hands were moving. She raised them to chest height, the movement deliberate and slow, like a magician showing the audience that there are no tricks up her sleeves. With a sharp snap, she pulled the cuff of the left glove, peeling the latex inside out. The sound was visceral, the stripping away of a synthetic skin. She balled it up in her palm and repeated the motion with the right hand, the material stretching and giving way. She dropped the wadded gloves onto the tray beside the discarded mirror. They landed with a soft, dull thud. But she wasn't finished. With the same fluid deliberation, she reached up, hooked a finger behind her ear, and snapped the elastic of her mask. It fell away, landing atop the gloves, a white flag of surrender. Now she was bare. No latex, no filter. I stared at her. Without the clinical armor, she looked impossibly exposed. I could see the pale skin of her wrists, the flush rising in her cheeks, the scrubbed clean pink of her nails. They were no longer the standardized parts of a clinician. They were her. The hands that held wine glasses on Friday nights, the hands that gestured wildly when she was arguing about politics, the hands I had spent years wondering about. She reached out again. My breath caught, freezing in my lungs. I expected her to hesitate, to acknowledge the massive breach of protocol that was occurring. You don't touch a patient with bare hands. You don't touch a friend like this. But Emily didn't hesitate. She moved with the terrifying confidence of someone who has calculated the risk and decided the payoff is worth the fall. Her hand didn't go to the instrument tray. It came back to me. The sensation of skin-on-skin contact, after 20 minutes of latex and cold metal, was electric. It was a shock to the system that made my toes curl inside my shoes. Her thumb landed on the point of my chin, exactly where it had been before. But the texture was entirely different. It was warm. It was slightly rough, the friction of a thumb pad that worked for a living, and undeniably human. She didn't press down this time. She didn't palpate for a joint issue. Instead, she began to move. Her thumb slid slowly, agonizingly slowly, from the center of my chin outward. She was tracing the line of my jaw, following the sharp angle of the bone with a reverence that felt like worship. "You're not grinding because of the architectural review," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the hum of the HVAC, a low vibration that I felt in my chest more than I heard with my ears. I couldn't speak. My mouth was still slightly open, a reflex from the exam, but my tongue felt heavy, useless. I could only shake my head, a microscopic movement against her hand. "And it's not the caffeine," she continued, her fingers curling under my jawline, tipping my head back further. "The tension, it's resistance." Her thumb reached the corner of my jaw, right over the knot of muscle that had been plaguing me for days. She stopped there, applying a gentle, steady pressure. It wasn't clinical massage. It was a claim. "Resistance to what?" I managed to rasp out. Emily looked down at me, her eyes crinkling at the corners with a sudden, fierce intensity. She moved her thumb in a small circle, rubbing the ache. "Resistance to this," she murmured. "You're clenching because you're trying not to say it. You're trying to keep it locked down. It's not stress, it's restraint." She was right. The diagnosis was perfect. The pain in my jaw wasn't from work. It was the physical manifestation of biting my tongue every time she looked at me. It was the ache of holding back the words I wanted to say, the desire I wanted to act on. I had been grinding my teeth to keep from doing exactly what I wanted to do right now. "And you?" I whispered, the challenge returning, emboldened by the heat of her hand on my skin. "Your hands were shaking. Is that restraint too?" Emily went still. Her thumb paused its hypnotic rhythm against my jaw. For a second, I thought I had pushed too far, that I had broken the spell. But then she leaned in, bringing her face down until I could feel the heat radiating from her skin against mine. "My hands never shake," she said, her voice dropping to a low, rough register that sent a shiver straight down my spine. That wasn't a tremor. That was my body trying to figure out why I was holding a mirror when I wanted to be holding you. The confession hung between us, stark and undeniable. The last barrier of just friends didn't just crack, it shattered. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was telling me, in the plainest language possible, that the clinical distance had been a torture for her too. She slid her hand further back, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck. The contrast was overwhelming. The sterile, bright room, the hum of the equipment, and the messy, hot reality of her grip tightening on me. She used the leverage to pull me slightly, not up, but in. "I'm done looking for cracks," she breathed, her thumb resuming its trace, moving down from my jaw to the sensitive cord of muscle in my neck. I think I want to see what happens when we finally break. The verbal confession was the incision, sharp and precise. But the anticipation that followed was the ache of the anesthesia finally wearing off. The numbness of professional protocol, which had kept us insulated for years, vanished in a heartbeat, leaving every nerve ending exposed and screaming for contact. Emily didn't kiss me immediately. That would have been too simple, too impulsive. And if I had learned anything in the last 20 minutes, it was that Emily didn't do impulsive. She did deliberate. She did calculated. She did thorough. She kept her left hand tangled in the hair at the base of my skull, anchoring me to the headrest, while her right hand slid up to cup my cheek. Seeing her mouth this close felt like a revelation. I had looked at her lips 1,000 times over coffee or drinks, but I had never seen them like this, swollen, raw, and terrifyingly open. She leaned down. It was a slow, hydraulic descent, controlled and inevitable. I stopped breathing. I watched her eyes flutter shut as she crossed the final inch of the intimate zone. When her lips finally brushed mine, it wasn't a collision. It was a calibration. It was soft, tentative, a question asked in the silence of the room. Is this real? Are we doing this? I answered by surging up against the constraints of the chair. I chased the contact, pressing my mouth against hers with a desperation that shattered the tentative mood instantly. And that was all the permission she needed. Emily made a low sound in her throat, a growl that vibrated against my lips, and the kiss deepened, turning heavy and wet. It was a reclamation. She kissed me with the same intensity she applied to everything else in her life, focused, exacting, and overwhelming. Her tongue swept into my mouth, not tentative now, but claiming the space she had just been examining. The taste was a dizzying mix of the clinical and the personal, the sharp, sterile tang of the dental mint lingering from the exam, layered over the warm, dark flavor of coffee and the unique biological taste of her. My hands, which had been gripping the armrests of the chair like lifelines, abandoned their post. I reached up, my fingers digging into the fabric of her navy scrubs. The material was rough cotton, utilitarian and stiff, but the body beneath it was solid heat. I pulled her closer, trying to drag her down into the chair with me. I wanted to erase the vertical hierarchy. I wanted to collapse the distance between doctor and patient until there was nothing left but skin. The dental chair, designed for passivity, became a leverage point. The headrest that had been holding me still for her exam now served to lock me in place for her pleasure. I couldn't pull away if I wanted to. My head was cradled, my neck exposed, and she took full advantage of the angle. She broke the kiss to trail her mouth down the line of my jaw, retracing the path her thumb had taken moments ago. Her lips were hot and wet against my skin, a stark contrast to the cool, conditioned air of the room. "You're so tense," she murmured against the sensitive skin below my ear, her voice rough, wrecked. "I can feel your pulse jumping." "You're the one holding the scalpel," I gasped, my head falling back further, giving her access to my throat. "No scalpel," she whispered, biting lightly at the cord of muscle in my neck, sending a shockwave of sensations straight to my core. "Just pressure. I'm just relieving the pressure." She kissed her way back up to my mouth, and this time, there was no hesitation. It was messy. It was human. It was the complete antithesis of the sterile, white environment surrounding us. The contrast was intoxicating. The hum of the high-tech equipment, the smell of disinfectant, the blinding white light, all serving as the backdrop for this frantic, heated tangle of bodies. We were making a mess of the sterile field. We were contaminating the scene with sweat and breath and friction. I threaded my fingers into her hair, messing up the neat ponytail she wore for work, pulling her head down to deepen the angle. The friction of our bodies, her chest pressing against mine, the weight of her hips leaning into the side of the chair, created a feedback loop of heat that threatened to fog the windows. For years, we had danced around this. We had hidden behind the safety of friendship, behind the protocols of our careers. But the anesthesia had worn off completely now. The numbness was gone. There was only the sharp, blinding reality of her mouth on mine and the terrifying realization that I never wanted her to stop. The clinic, the city, the deadline, it all dissolved. The only thing that existed was the pressure of her body and the taste of her surrender. The separation was physically painful, like tearing a suture before the wound had healed. We pulled apart slowly, peeling away from each other with a reluctance that was palpable in the sudden, heavy silence of the room. The only sound left was the ragged, synchronized rhythm of our breathing, loud and unmasked in the acoustic stillness of the operatory. Emily leaned back against the instrument cabinetry, putting a few inches of necessary distance between us. Her chest was heaving beneath the navy scrubs, rising and falling in a tempo that matched my own. Her lips, usually pressed into a line of professional concentration, were swollen and red, a stark, messy splash of color in the monochrome room. She looked wrecked in the most beautiful way possible. A clinician whose carefully maintained sterile field had been hopelessly compromised. She reached up and killed the overhead light. The harsh spotlight vanished, plunging us back into the soft, ambient glow of the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling window. The world softened, leaving just two people standing in the wreckage of their platonic history. "So," she said, her voice a low rasp that scraped against the quiet. It was the voice of a woman who had just shouted in a library. "Is the jaw pain better?" I let out a laugh, a breathless, shaky sound that bubbled up from my chest. "I think you just replaced one kind of tension with another. I'm not sure this is standard of care, doctor." "Good," she murmured, wiping a smudge of her own lipstick from the corner of her mouth with her thumb. A gesture so casual and intimate it made my stomach flip. "I can work with that. That's a manageable pathology." She didn't apologize. She didn't retreat. She looked at me with that same unflinching focus, but the cool professional distance was gone, replaced by a possessive warmth. "Up," she commanded softly, tapping the foot pedal with the toe of her sneaker. The chair hummed beneath me, the backrest rising with a slow, mechanical whine. The return to vertical was disorienting. My equilibrium was shot. As the world tilted back upright, the blood rushed from my head, leaving me lightheaded and dizzy with the sudden shift in gravity. I gripped the armrests, the leather cool under my sweaty palms, grounding myself as the clinic reassembled itself around me. I wasn't a patient anymore. I was just a woman sitting in a chair, looking at her best friend who had just had her hands in my mouth. I swung my legs over the side, my shoes hitting the laminate floor with a solid, grounding thud. Standing up felt like learning to walk on a ship at sea. My body felt different, rewired, sensitive, buzzing with a residual charge that made my skin prickle. Emily was watching me, her hip resting against the counter, arms crossed, loosely now. "We should eat," she said, nodding toward the hallway where the forgotten takeout bag sat in the sterilization room. "The pad thai is definitely cold." "I don't care about the temperature," I said, stepping into her space one last time, needing to verify the connection before we left the sanctuary of the operatory. I brushed my knuckles against hers. "I just care about the company." She caught my hand, interlacing her fingers with mine. Her grip was firm, capable, the hand of a surgeon who knew exactly what she was holding. "Protocol change," she whispered, squeezing my hand tight. "No more appointments. Just dinner." We walked out of the dark operatory, hand in hand, moving back down the long hallway. The clinic was still quiet, still smelling of eugenol and disinfectant, but the air felt different now. We grabbed the cold food, the crinkle of the paper bag sounding loud and joyous, a domestic noise in a clinical space. We walked to the front, the heavy glass door waiting to release us back into the city night. The clinic wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was the site of the incision, the place where we finally cut through the pretense. As Emily turned the key in the lock, the bolt sliding home with a heavy, final thunk, I knew the memory was sealed inside. If you enjoyed this checkup, subscribe for more stories where the tension finally breaks.